funny things occasionally in that book too, though I'm getting a bit nastier in that book. So my wife says, "Hey, tone this down. That was a nasty comment there, you know." Because I've gotten to the point that I don't believe anything anymore. So I've gotten really cynical, I'm afraid, and stuff. You don't win friends and influence people, as George Jr. found out the other day by being too cynical. So you gotta make believe you care anyway. Let's see. So we were trying to move along in this presentation here, and we had this thing about Herod burning all the records and the viscosity, the people from the family of Jesus. That you see, the problem with there being a family of Jesus is that it kind of undercuts the supernatural Christ issue. And the people who were into Jesus as a supernatural God, being, person, whatever, as the theology developed in the 2nd and 3rd century, particularly the 2nd century, were not happy with the family people who were claiming, physical relationships. Now, particularly if the relationship is on the father's side, in what way are they a member of the family, you see? They're not in theological terms for people who go according to the idea of divine sonship and so on. So these presentations clashed, and the supernatural Christ won out by the time of Eusebius. As you see, he's totally addicted to the supernatural Christ. And the family person advanced beyond other men simply by his practice of righteousness or being a prophet of some kind, took 2nd place and fell back, and over time almost totally disappeared in favor of, well, it's really Paul that presents Jesus as a supernatural being. And I don't know, you say, well, the apostles did too. Well, no, we don't really have the writings of the apostles that we can rely on, that we can be comfortable with, that they're authentic. So we don't know what the people around him thought. And we certainly, if James, in my book I try to say, once you've found the historical James, you've found the historical Christ. And I meant by that if James, who was closest to him family-wise, spent his whole life with him, went around with him, if you like, regardless of the Gospels say a prophet is never accepted in his own house, in his own family, etc. Those are polemics against the family that have gotten into the Gospels. Whether he really said that or not, we'd have to argue. Or who are my mother and brothers to me, and things of statements of that kind in the Gospels. The Gospels are later documents, and we're not sure that they accurately represent what happened in Palestine in the period of 30 or so, some period around that. So what I meant by the statement that I don't think a person who spent his whole life with him and succeeded him and so on could have been mistaken about his doctrines. The same as I don't think that Teddy Kennedy, whether we like him or not, was mistaken about what his brother thought. And I don't think Bobby Kennedy was mistaken either. These guys knew him and succeeded him, and they didn't have any illusions. Some other person could come up in Italy someplace and say, well, I believe in the divine John Kennedy, and these family members of Kennedy got it all wrong. And in the course of time, that person can overwhelm them with his literary ability and acumen and public relations skills. And therefore it can turn out that his approach becomes the favorite approach. But that doesn't mean it's the accurate approach. So I thought that to my mind, if all these people existed as we think that they may or may not have or did, then clearly the one who was closest and succeeded in those should have known more about him than someone who was his enemy and opposed him, persecuted Christians unto death, and only knew him through supernatural visionary experience. Because to my mind, supernatural visionary experience, just reflecting the own person's being, has nothing to do with historical events. So I don't think that the woman that Mel Gibson used to portray the violence done to Jesus, who lived in the 1800s, who the Pope just beatified, knows anything about what Jesus underwent, period. And she's just reflecting her own, whatever it is that she's suffering from or going through, or enjoys her own sadomasochism. The believer may think differently, but I'm speaking as a historian, not as a believer. It doesn't make any sense to me that the people around a given person didn't know him better than people who didn't know him. If someone told my kids, well, we know what your father really was, I mean, I hope my kids would laugh in their face, because I would think that my kids know me 100 times better than any interloper from some other place. So I just disagree with the normal historical approach, but look, all history says the other people are correct and people like me are wrong. So who am I to argue with all history? Except, honestly, I think there's great honor to argue with all history. Even if you're just one person and you're convinced that you are, in fact, have the correct view and all history tells you differently, I would stick to your point of view, because that's what makes life interesting. Stick to what you consider. Paul did that, and he won out, actually. I'm sure everyone in his time were laughing at him and considered him in a very negative way. And yet, because he was so effective in his writings, he came to dominate the tradition that we now all feel familiar and close and affectionate towards. And the others who may have been laughing at him at that time have gone into basically the trash heap of history. So stick to your guns, good or bad, and they may turn out to be correct. Okay, now we were talking about the John the Baptist situation and the testimonies regarding John the Baptist when we finished up last time. And here Eusebius is kind to us. He does give the counter-indicating material from Josephus that would actually conflict with the Gospels. And I don't think he realizes there's a conflict. You say, well, how can he be so stupid? He doesn't realize there's a conflict here? He doesn't seem to. So let's see the material from Josephus, since we don't have Josephus in front of us. And even if we did, this is not from the Jewish War, is it? This is from the Antiquities. And you're now familiar with the fact there are two works of Josephus that have survived, correct? One called The War and one called the Antiquities, and they were written at different times. Just to test your knowledge a little bit, not that I expect you all to know this, but maybe it would have percolated through. When was The War written? Huh? First, yeah, when? Well, right after the war was fought. Some of the war was fought between 66 and 70. Masada fell in 73.